I want to thank everyone for joining the Hampshire Insurance Department today for our discussion about our auto insurance frequently asked questions document. I'm joined by a number of the staff from the New Hampshire Insurance Department today that include James Fox, our Property and Casualty Director, Emily Doherty, who's our Property and Casualty Legal Counsel, Christian Citarella, who's our Property and Casualty Actuary, and Tiffany Fuller and Andrew Demers, who will be helping us today with our questions and answer portion. Auto insurance is an important protection for many Granite Staters, and our auto insurance frequently asked question was first written back in 2009, and since then there have been some important updates to New Hampshire insurance laws and regulations. The department's frequently asked question document remains the most popular consumer document on our website, with over 140,000 downloads since 2013. We're excited about this updated document and happy to share some important information about auto insurance with all of you today. I'm going to first introduce James Fox, our P&C Director. Thanks, James. You're on mute, James.
Hi, yeah, my problem was moving my mouse too far away from you. Yeah, my name is James Fox, and so I thought, so I think the goal obviously is not to read the document to you, is to give you some insight into parts of the document and why they are, how they are, and what they mean. And then, as the commissioner has said, some updates as to how things are interpreted. But we will read at least the title. So the first one is why should I buy auto insurance? And I think that goes back to, I think, the department's philosophy as far as auto insurance and how we testify at the legislature and request legislation, is that in New Hampshire, the idea behind insurance is that you're able to protect yourself. We don't have mandatory auto insurance like 48 other states do. We have a lot of uptake on insurance. Most people have auto insurance in New Hampshire. We're usually in the top, I think, 10%, 10 states. But the reason why there's two reasons why insurance is important. In my because you can protect yourself against someone who might hit you who doesn't have insurance or has low insurance. And if you don't have insurance, the other way you won't be protecting yourself is how that usually works is if there's a claim and you haven't been able to pay it, then you don't have financial responsibility. So the Department of Safety will take your driver's license, so you won't be able to drive. So that's why it's important. Now, the next issue is it says what are the common types of coverages available. Now, as far as I think the first step of that is who gets coverage in New Hampshire, and that's one of the things that we have that a lot of people don't know where it comes from, but it's called the Take All Comers rule. That means basically all auto insurance companies must do two things in New Hampshire: either write the coverage within their group, or they need to have an agreement with another insurance company and another group who's willing to write the insurance. It's called a path to policy, is what we call that. And that comes out of actually our rule 1400, which is the corresponding personalized auto rule. And it says all insurers must write all eligible risks. And the eligible risk in New Hampshire is someone who either is a resident in New Hampshire, so not just part-time, or the car is exclusively garage tier. That's basically when you're able to get a New Hampshire auto policy. We used to have the residency form. The residency form now is gone. The reason we and it was Commissioner Nicolopoulos. The reason we recently got rid of that is that we didn't think it was helping people in protecting themselves, because there was more often insurance companies that were having difficulty recognizing the issue. So they wanted to comply, but they had a hard time recognizing the form, and then they'd be issuing basically illegal cancellations because the insured should be allowed to have the coverage. So we get complaints about that. Ever since we took the form away, we've not had any complaints about the ability to get insurance coverage in the state, and we have not had an experience of rate evasion of people coming from other states into New Hampshire that we've been made aware of. So I think that is a positive, and it's working well. Your document lists, the basic coverages that we all on this phone call I'm sure they know about: liability coverage, uninsured motorist coverage, med pay, and collision comprehensive, or as we call FISDAM, and then towing and rental. So I think in that area, in semi-recent times, So I think maybe this is just make sure that people understand is, and as uninsured motorists probably have the most tweaks. And this is a good time to remind people, some, unlike a lot of other insurance, a lot of these coverages are in statute. So the way we look at it is like the statute rules. So no matter what policy you get, it can't violate that statute, even if it's written to violate that statute. It was not allowed to violate that statute. So that's the bedrock. You cannot change those coverages. So for auto, the mandatory minimum is, most people know, 25 per accident per individual, to 50 per accident limit, and then 25 for property damage. So within that, the statute freezes you get that coverage if you have a policy. You can't, insurance companies can't like put in exclusions that get below that, other than I'll say in the transportation network company statute, it is allowed there. That was like the one exception, and that in that case, insurance companies can put on and put it off. And we don't consider that to be a ride sharing or livery. That's a different world. So we don't talk about that really in this document specifically. The other two things in uninsured motorists that I think that most people probably should know is, one, back 5 years ago, we changed. So it used to be, if you had, just to make it easy, if you had a 100-300 policy and you got into an accident, you weren't at fault. Somebody else is at fault, but there are multiple injured parties. They had a 100-300, and then the actual funds got spread out. You couldn't trigger your uninsured motorist because the limits on that other person's policy were the same as yours, so they weren't underinsured. We thought that wasn't, again, allowing consumers to protect themselves like we thought they should be able to. So we changed it to it's the recovery amount. So if the recovered amount that you're eligible to recover is lower than your 1.3, then you're underinsured at that point, and then you get up to your 1.3 after you subtract what you could get. So that was, again, so you can protect yourself. The other part that we changed, I think 6 years ago, was that it used to be, so as I said, there's like mandatory minimums, and they're like in the statute. Contracts can't change that. So one of the things that the Supreme Court said long ago was that for uninsured motorists, the scope of the uninsured motorist coverage had to be the same as the mandatory minimum, up to the mandatory minimum, but then above that, it did not have to be identical coverage. So you were basically, say you bought a 1.3, 100,000, 300,000. You got the 2550 had to be the exact scope of coverage, but because of the tweaks, that's the specific language in uninsured motorist statute, the Supreme Court said, but after the 2550, the carriers could reduce the coverage scope. And so we thought that wasn't protecting yourself like people wanted, because if they wanted the liability to be coverage to be, X wide, they would want their uninsured motorist, which protects themselves, to also be X wide. So we just added a couple of words, which is all the Supreme Court really was saying we have to do. That flew right through. I think it was even called a loophole by one of the legislators. So that's probably the two uninsured motorist thing I would think that you should probably try to remember there, that some people don't remember. Now, the next thing is MedPay. So MedPay used to be, so that's obviously a no-fault coverage in your auto policy, but it used to be, I think as Representative Hunt used to call a rack rate. You used to get, you didn't get reasonable medical costs. You got, so basically that's if you're injured in an auto accident, you get your medical expenses paid up to the limit, which is usually fairly low. The mandatory minimum's 1,000, but some people have more. It used to be, it was a full payment unless it was fraud. So even if the doctor that you were paying had really high expenses, it had to be paid 100%, unless it was fraud. So we changed it to basically the doctor has to, or the provider has to take reasonable expenses. That's what the obligation is for the insurance company to pay. And if there's any argument about what a reasonable expense is, we will, at the insurance department, will decide that issue. And then after that, here, there's really nothing to say. Everybody has collision coverage. The rest of them, the only one I would say is rental is something we look at. I think at the end of this presentation, there's a total loss section. We are looking at that again it's kind of a protect the consumer Most policies, as everybody knows, it provides 30 days of rental. But then sometimes in the total loss, it's less than that, or it can be like, you get like 5 days after an offer is made. And there's a balancing there. We want to make sure that the consumer has a rental long enough to be able to like act reasonably and replace their vehicle. So we don't want insurers going too slowly and then having the rental run out, and we don't want consumers not acting reasonably and prudently in seeking a new vehicle and a total loss. So we are looking at that language to change the total loss statute. We haven't actually done that yet, but we are looking at that. So that's pretty much what I have to say in that area. The next one is, what do I need to know when I buy auto insurance? So the thought that what I would say in this, again, probably not for this crowd, but is if somebody doesn't know anything about insurance, they should absolutely, in my opinion, go to an independent agent and get their insurance coverage from an independent agent who is acting on their behalf with multiple insurers to make sure that you get the coverage that you want. Because as I said, up to the 2550, the statute controls, and we don't allow exclusions above that. But after that, unless if some of the exclusions have been around forever, I admit that, but we will allow exclusions above that down to the 2550, as long as they don't violate public interest, which is the commissioner's role to step in if he thinks it does. So that's what I would say on that issue. If you are knowledgeable in insurance like we all are, then you could go to an independent agent and shop for value, absolutely, or you could go to a captive agent or a direct writer, whatever your preference is. But I would say for the average person in the state of New Hampshire, an independent agent is a great resource. The next question I've already answered. Do I have to be a resident of New Hampshire to buy auto insurance? The general answer is yes. But if your car is exclusively garaged here, then the answer is you don't need to be. So if you have a car you leave on Lake Winnipesaukee, and then you would be able to get that covered here because the risk is located here. It's kind of like old, where is the risk? What coverages should I buy? That's to a certain extent, a personal choice. I think most people would say the 25-50-25 policy is extremely is a very low policy, and it is there because not everybody has a lot of money to buy policies, and we want to make some people buy some coverage. But again, even if you think I'm a very safe driver, I don't need a 25-50, but people who are unsafe drivers might hit you who don't have any insurance. So if you have assets, I would suggest you buy a large auto policy and put an umbrella above it. But your coverages in New Hampshire are always going to follow that mandatory statute. You got whatever your limit is for your liability, you're going to get a corresponding uninsured and underinsured motors coverage. You're going to get MedPay. I think MedPay is good, so I would suggest having an increased MedPay. And then collision is if you have a car that's worth fixing, really. Okay. How much coverage should I buy? I kind of already did it. That's all. That's the risk. I'm very risk averse. I think most insurance people are risk averse, so we have pretty strong insurance policies. But that's a personal choice. But here it says the what if. There's a lot of what ifs, and I would want to be able to protect myself. As we said, and we keep talking about uninsured motorists. So one thing I would say, Emily said, make sure you say that is uninsured motorist only covers bodily injury. But obviously bodily injury is the most important part for you if you get hurt. Property damage is only covered in the rarest of the insurance companies that become insolvent, which is very unlikely. And how you protect yourself in the collision situation where somebody hits your car and you have collision, is that you're allowed to use your collision coverage, and the deductible that we usually would have has to be waived if the person's identified, they're solely at fault. I think it might be one other, but that's basically it. You get your deductible waived. And I think the takeaway from all this coverage talk is that, again, you're able to protect yourself in the state of New Hampshire. If you and again, though, a lot of that stuff, if you're not knowledgeable or somebody isn't, they should probably go to an agent. They can explain all this to them. But you're able to protect yourself, and you don't have to therefore worry about the uninsured motorists on the road other than them hitting you generally. Now, the next section goes into rates and premiums and underwriting, which I am not knowledgeable about like Christian is, so I'm going to now hand it off to Christian.
And just as a note to everyone, we want to have some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat box, and Tiffany and myself will make note of those, and we will relay those to our subject matter experts at the end. So just type your questions in the chat box. We'll have time to get to them. Thank you. Christian, go ahead.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, my name is Christian Citarella. I'm the Chief Property and Casualty Actuary at the department. James asked me to talk a little bit about the questions here that deal with rating and premiums. The first of those is the seventh on the list, which also includes underwriting. I guess premium, just start with the end there, is the premium, of course, is what you pay for your coverage in any insurance policy. The rating process is how the carriers determine what you pay. Underwriting is a little more nebulous. From my perspective, it's the process by which you end up in the correct bucket of rates and ultimately premium. There's an underwriting process as well that goes into a decision whether or not to offer coverage. Now that in the personal auto world in New Hampshire doesn't really come into play because of the take all comers rule. So, deciding whether or not to take on the risk is not an issue, shouldn't be an issue. So that aspect of underwriting doesn't play here. But then again, there is an underwriting process in making sure you get the right information, that the insurer gets accurate information in order to place the risk in the right classifications in order to develop the right premium. Generally speaking, we review all rate manuals, any changes to rating manuals. We look through all the rules that define all the different rating characteristics and classifications, and all that has to be submitted to the department and approved, so that the goal here is to make sure that all consumers are being treated the same. They're all being reviewed consistently and objectively. So you bet the way the rating process begins is you have base rates for each of in most cases, you have base rates for each of those coverages that James mentioned earlier, and then a whole series of different rating factors that get applied, to those base rates depending upon, the type of classification or characteristic and how it applies to each of those coverages. The next question deals with those factors. So what are some factors that companies use to determine rates? And I found it interesting in the order in which these examples or these broad categories of rating factors were listed here. And I promised James I wouldn't do any wordsmithing on the document, so I won't. But I guess what I'll say is, don't think that the order that they're listed is the order of importance or the order, I guess, of size of factors. So, for example, type of auto, which is listed like 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one down, has a very large effect on how much you're going to pay. I mean, if you're driving, a 2010, Honda Civic, or if you're driving a 2020, I don't know, Cadillac something or another, it's going to be much more expensive to drive the newer, more expensive vehicle, right? So, that's going to way overshadow anything that might deal with, whether you're, a 30-year-old female or a 50-year-old male. Just to mention that on gender and age, over the years has diminished quite a bit as far as being a distinguishing rating characteristic, with the exception, of course, of young male drivers. So basically, what we're seeing is once you're over the age of 25, you really don't see a measurable change in rates for age or gender for many years. It does affect things in the more senior years, but not not to as much of an extent as I would have thought, or had been in earlier years. Of course, coverage limits is going to affect ultimate premium. I will say though, depending upon the sophistication and knowledge of insurance rates and coverages, it's important to understand that if you double your limits, if you go from 50, 100 to 100, 300, which is more than doubling, it's not going to be a doubling of your premium. So it's important to talk to, as James, it's important not to, not to anticipate the worst when it comes to prices. Those limits generally only apply to, they only apply to liability. Most of it is drawn through bodily injury liability. Property damage, liability is much less expensive. And those, those changes in rates, if you increase those limits, it's not going to affect how much it costs for, your own car to fix your own car, or your, collision or comprehensive. So, just understand that it's not a, it's not doom and gloom it's not going to significantly increase rates or premium to increase those limits. Other things that come up on that list, of course, how you use your vehicle, where you drive, who's driving your vehicle is very important. And carriers will include that in their rating process. And then at the very bottom of the list, credit history is mentioned, and that is a consideration that just about all carriers use in New Hampshire. I will say though, unless you're very much at an extreme in sort of a credit score situation, it is not as dramatic a difference as I said, as some, especially things like your driving history, the type of car you drive, things like that. So that might be, I don't know, it might be a little bit of a misconception as to how much credit history affects driving score, but driving insurance rates, and that's that's the way that anyway, that's the thought that I have on that. The next question goes into what kind of discounts might I receive, and again, the document is excellent the way it is, but these are just additional characteristics, additional rating factors. In most of the cases, there is very compelling evidence that it is cheaper to insure, and there is less of a risk for folks that do get these discounts. And so it's not so much, it's less of a marketing as it is additional characteristics. Anti-theft devices, if you have an anti-theft device on your car, it's less likely to get stolen. Packaging your home, there is lots of evidence out there that suggests that those who have home coverage and auto coverage do have fewer losses on both. To the extent that it matches the discount, maybe not, but there is a benefit and a savings on the part of the carrier. So the point of this here, I think, is to make sure you talk to your agent, or even if if you're working with a direct writer, talk to them and ask them questions about what are the discounts. Is there a good student discount? I've got 2 kids in high school, and they're doing great. So do I get a good student discount? And talk those all through. Absolutely. So next question, should I get rate quotes from different insurance providers? Absolutely. Shop around. We must say that quite often when we work with folks up in our consumer division. There's no harm. It's you're purchasing a service, you're purchasing a product, just like in any other thing. You wouldn't buy the first television. Well, you might, but I tend to shop around from different stores to buy TVs, or different websites to buy, if you're going to go on vacation. Why not do the same for insurance? Absolutely. So the next question has to do with a coverage question. So if my friend asks to use an auto for their own errands, will my auto insurance cover them while they are driving? This is one of the one of the few coverage questions that I'm quite confident in answering, and the answer is yes, that the coverage follows the vehicle under very unusual circumstances. Would it not cover, and that requires informing both the driver and the insurance carrier that this person is absolutely under no circumstances allowed to drive my car, but that's rare. Can a family member's poor driving record affect my premium and insurability if my own driving record is clear? Yes. So anyone who's going to have regular access to that vehicle, and especially anyone who lives in that home that is of driving age, can drive that vehicle. So the insurance carriers definitely, well, I wouldn't say definitely, but very frequently inquire as to who lives in the home, and then we'll seek out their driving history and rate accordingly. Must my son or daughter be added to my auto insurance policy once he or she is licensed? Yes, because it gets complicated, and it can get financially difficult if you don't report those. The new drivers in your home, once they have a license, and that's anecdotal as far as whether they have the license or not have a license. The carriers can rate anyone who's of driving age, but I think it is good practice to let your carrier know that when your teenager gets his or her license, inform the insurance carrier, and that way you can be covered, and be paying appropriately for the coverage that you have. And carriers can, upon finding out that there is a new driver, adjust your premiums accordingly, and I think they should. Let's see. Do I need insurance? Have I overstepped? Emily, where are you taking over?
I can jump in at any time, Christian.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Commercial insurance versus personal lines. That's yours. Go for it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Christian. My name's Emily Doherty, and I'm the department's property and casualty attorney. The question Christian just started to ask was, do you need commercial insurance if you're using your personal vehicle for carpooling or for your pizza delivery job? And generally, personal lines policies cover the carpooling. That's not an issue. With regard to the pizza delivery job, insurers have traditionally sought to exempt that coverage, but the department has traditionally required insurers to provide the minimum mandatory limit, so the $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident, and $25,000 for property damage. However, the department strongly suggests that to the extent you're contemplating engaging in commercial activities, that you contact your insurer or your insurance agent and discuss it with them. You don't want to find out after you're in an accident that you didn't have coverage. So we strongly suggest that you contact your insurer or your insurance agent to make sure you have coverage for the commercial activity that you're contemplating before you start it. And then another question in the document is whether you need insurance for your ATV or snowmobile. In New Hampshire, it's not statutorily required. However, it's generally prudent to get that coverage. And we also note that generally you can purchase auto coverage for any vehicle that's registrable for road use. Another of the issues is whether why you should provide accurate information to your insurance company when you're applying for your insurance policy. It's important that you provide that information in your application so that when you're submitting a claim for coverage, that it's not later denied when you have a potential loss. So you want to be as truthful and accurate on that application as possible so that you don't avoid the problem of potentially having coverage denied down the road if you have a claim. And now I'll turn it back to Property and Casualty Director James Fox.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And the one way you can kind of 100% lose coverage is if you lie about your residency. Then you get to do an EUO, and if you're not a resident, that's a problem. Okay, so now the next section 2 is filing an auto insurance claim and basic information about repairs. So this is pretty basic, so I think we can go pretty fast through most of the rest of this. If I'm in an accident, should I file a claim with my insurance company or the company of the other party? As it says in here, the departments would suggest for most inexperienced people to file, if they have collision coverage, file with their own carrier for collision, because it's not an adversarial situation. If it's your carrier, they're a little more on your side. We understand that when it's a liability, it's more adversarial. So that's our suggestion. Although I'm not saying that's always the case. You may have an insurance company on the other side that is super helpful, and then either is probably okay. What should I do if I have file a claim with my insurance company? I would say it's pretty, I wrote in little notes here while I was listening to Emily, report promptly and cooperate. I think if you do those two things, you're going to be okay. And then what should I do if I file a claim with another party's insurance company? You know, I would just document everything you do in case something comes up later about how it happened and when. And then, the next section is a little more, when can I expect to hear from an insurance company after I file a claim? I'd say that so the answer is 10 days, but the 1002 is a rule we've had for a really long time. And whenever we do exams on insurance companies, claims exams, we look at whether they've complied with the detailed requirements of 1002, which tend to be pretty procedural, but they're important to keep the claimants informed about what's going on. So we actually consider them to be important. You got to do this within 10 days, and you got to issue delay letters every 30 days. And you got to say why the delay is happening. So I would say suggestion to insurance companies is it would be worth taking some time to review 1002 again if you haven't done it in a while, our rule, and make sure that everyone's complying with it. So what if the other company's insurance, the other driver's insurance company denies my claim, or I disagree with a settlement offer? Well, you can take them to court, obviously, but you could also, if you have collision, you can use your own collision coverage. Do I have to pay a deductible when I file a claim? If it's a property claim on your own policy, that's when deductibles happen. Again, we said earlier, if it's an uninsured motorist hits you, there's a rule in a statute that says you don't have to pay a deductible. Again, a lot of times insurance companies have trouble remembering that. And, generally, as my view is that insurance companies write their insurance nationally. And then sometimes if it's we're only 0.4% of the market, they have a harder time remembering our different laws. How will the insurance company determine the value of my vehicle? Okay, so that's like a total loss question, even though there's a total loss section. So that's important again. So if it's a total loss, they have to follow again 1002.15, which is the total loss rule, and that is absent an agreed value policy. So yeah, if you have like an antique car or something, you've agreed that it's worth X dollars. If it's not that, then the insurance company, regardless of what the insurance policy says, must follow the total loss rule. That's the department's position. So, and basically the total loss rule, most companies, what they do is they use a methodology that's accepted methodology. The department lists the accepted methodologies. So CCC always comes to mind because I see that most often. And then, so how that works, since I don't really feel the need to go through the whole total loss section. So how that works is basically the insurance company gets CCC, they run a report based upon comparables, they move things up and down a little bit depending upon the particular vehicle that they are dealing with, and then they issue a report, the consumer gets the report, the consumer says my car's worth more than that, and we say okay, so then they're supposed to then the consumer's supposed to then go out and get reliable sources to say, which could be documented sales, I think it could be quotes from actual dealers, auto dealers, about what the car's worth, similarly, what the car would be worth to sell. there's listed what they can do. And then they're supposed to submit those to the insurance company, and the insurance company is supposed to review that submission and act on it. I think as long as in good faith, I would say. And then we at the department, if a complaint comes in, that would come to the consumer division, to Keith Nyan, who's in charge of that, the director Nyan. And we would review whether the insurance carrier followed 1,215. We wouldn't really review whether they followed anything in their policies, because again, it's a rule. I don't think when we review policies, we say take that out of your policy and put a rule in, but the rule is the rule. So that's how we deal with that. And the other, as I said earlier, we did add rental to it recently. And I think we're going to look at that again because it's not operating like I anticipated. Let's see, the next question is, my insurance company, I can't seem to agree on the amount of my loss. What can I do? So that's your insurance company. So if you can't agree on the amount of the loss, if it's a total loss, you should use 1,215. If it's not a total loss, if it's a repair situation, then you could usually as appraisal clause, you use the appraisal clause, and if there isn't one, then you could I think you do a coverage case or some type of litigation, or you can come to us. But we look at it a little differently here. The way we look at it is if it's a regulatory violation. So if the insurance companies, if it's just a dispute, a reasonable dispute, we can't really jump in and say we agree with this party, that party, because they're not really a court. But if it's so out of alignment with what a reasonable amount would be, then we can say it's an unfair insurance trade practice, which we have done, and say the insurance company needs to look at this again closely to not run afoul of the failure to equitably settle law. So that's important. Can the insurer force, if I had personal property in my auto when it was damaged, stolen, will that be covered? No. Can an insurer force me to pay multiple estimates? No. Again, that's 1,214. We just says a distinction between multiple estimates and, if you can't be engaged your own repair shop and they're doing supplements and then expect the supplements to be paid for. That's not what we call it. That's not what we mean by an estimate. Will the insurance company pay the cost of renting a car if my auto is in an accident? Okay, so if it's we're talking about a liability situation, there's a rule 1,213. That's loss of use. So the key there is loss of use. It's not that you're in an accident. It's that you're in an accident and your car cannot be operated. So if that's the case, then you have a right to a car of like, kind, and quality. So, which can be difficult if you have an unusual car. We have had cases where, somebody had a very unusual car that was covered. And we said it has to be a like, kind, and quality, and the insurance company had to look far and wide to find that and bring it in. If it's a collision, coverage type situation, your policy says what you get for loss of use. Can an insurance company deduct betterment? Yes. The idea is putting you in the same position you were in before the accident. In this liability, the idea is not to put you in a better position. Can the car insurance company deduct for things like unrepaired damage or rust? Again, it's a betterment issue, yes. Can an insurance company use aftermarket or non-original equipment manufacturer parts? That's been an issue, exactly. So just so everybody knows, I always like to, so there we have a statute that says allows the use of aftermarket parts after 2 years, 30,000 miles. The reason that's in there is, and it has to be safe parts, like, kind, of quality, as to fit and performance, is that if you just use original equipment parts all of the time, repairs are going to get really expensive and insurance is going to get really expensive. So we have to balance the ability for people to buy insurance with the protection of the consumer as the repair. So the philosophy is, this is the aftermarket parts statute is pro-consumer. It gets you a good repair for a good price, which helps you A, with repairing your vehicle, and B, keeping the cost of your insurance down. So we view that as a 100% pro-consumer law. It doesn't mean it can't use tweaks here and there, but it's a good law. Does my insurance company have to pay if special equipment on my auto is damaged? Basically, I would say if you didn't let them know about special equipment you put in, there's going to be a no. If you let them know and they provide some kind of coverage for it, then yes. Again, a lot of these things, I think, as Emily said, you should, when you have something unusual and you're like, what the heck gets covered, just always call your carrier. And if you're an insurance carrier out there, you should encourage people to call. If you're an agent, encourage people to call. Do I have the right to select a repair facility? Yes, or that's yes. So how the law works is everyone has that. You always have a right to. That's like a rule 1. You have a right to select your own repair facility that you want to use. Now, so that's a pro-consumer obligation that's in the statute. The issue, though, is that when you do that, you don't get to. You may not get. Basically the full amount of that charge, because the insurance company's obligation is not to go to the most expensive place. Their obligation is capped at, basically they have to identify a shop that would do it, do a good job. It's not the technical term in the rules, and that's what caps. It's a customary guarantees of workmanship in the statute. So they have to be able to do that, and then that's what caps the insurance company in the first instance. And then if there is a dispute with your independent shop, then the insurance company's obligation is to go forward and get another quote from an independent shop, and then that sets the price. Now, the thing about that could set the price, that could even set the price higher. That price is the price that decides it. Now, the insurance company might cave if the only shop they can get is higher than the request. But that's what we look at to see if there's been a violation of the right to use your own shop. The next one, I am dissatisfied with the repair work done to my auto by a repair facility. What obligation does the insurance company have to correct this facility? If the insurance company chose the shop, then they have to own that repair. If you chose your own independent shop and you decided to go there, then the insurance company does not have to make that call. That should be on the shop, between you and as the consumer in the shop to fix that problem. And then the next section, section 3, is total loss, which was rewritten last year. A few things that we did that are a little different is we actually, how it used to work is we decide what was a total loss for late model, I think newer cars, by using RSA 26122, which is a Department of Safety standard. So we just basically took that, referenced it into the total loss rule, and said, that's how we're gonna. Those are the total loss cars. And then the rest of this, pays for actual cash value. If you disagree, I went through it. Basically, if they use methodology at one of the CCCs and they just go into comparables, then if you just disagree, if you boil it down, you go get your own comparables and you send them to the insurance company. They're supposed to consider that. They can. The rule says they consider it even after they make the payment. So they can make a payment. You can take the payment and then you can still send in the comparables and say, I want you to consider this and give me more money. Are you allowed to retain your vehicle? Yes. You can. Then they basically start doing adding and subtracting, and then because they give you the salvage value subtracted, and all of this stuff, and basically you just get less money. Some people, don't want to have a salvage title, but if the department agrees with the insurance company that the total was appropriate, then you either have to either take the salvage or just take it, or not get the vehicle back and just take the total amount. You ask, why do I sign a power of attorney? You sign that because the insurance company needs it to do what they need to do. Is it better to use my own policy or the policy of the person who hit me? Again, I would just say, in my mind, you're not in the adversarial position with your own policy. So if you can do that, I would. Am I entitled to diminished value? Diminished value of the department, it's a tricky thing for the department to decide on a regulatory matter, because it's just, that's not kind of what we do. So we don't really view that as something we consider in any loss. So if you get in the car fixed, for example, it's easier to explain why it's confusing there. So if you get the car fixed and you say, oh, well, my car's fixed, it's worth less money now, but it's not worth, it's worth less money to sell it right then. But if you're going to keep it for 5 years, it's not. So for us to judge what a diminished value would be, it'd be appropriate. It's not something we feel we can do. So if you have an issue with diminished value, we're not saying you wouldn't recover that. We'd say that that's something that would be better to go to the judicial branch and bring a claim there for the diminished value piece. Are the rules and the laws the same for anti-classic? Yeah, unless it's a stated value policy. What if I refuse to release my vehicle from the tow facility when you may have to pay storage charges? My vehicle had custom parts on it. May I remove them? You need to discuss with your adjuster. Again, so that's something I would talk with we have that sometimes. That should be a a cooperative discussion between you and your insurance company. And then this is I just changed my oil. I got new tires. They're supposed to consider the condition, but it's not. For small minor stuff, you're not going to move the needle much. Is fair market value the same as retail? No. Fair market value is fair market value. You should look at the rule for the definitions. Do I have a right to a rental? As I said several times during the presentation, we did put a right to a rental in 1215F. I'm not sure it's really worked the way I anticipated, so we are going to look at it. If anybody wants to provide input while we're looking at it or talk about the rental issue, I'm always happy to chat about it. I've been thinking about it a lot. The way to basically, I said, balance the interests of the consumer and the interests of the insurance company. And with that, I think we've covered everything that we intended to cover with at least 12 minutes left. So thank you. I'll throw it back to Andrew.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. I think the main takeaways here are a couple things. A lot has changed in the world. Uber driving is a thing. That didn't used to be a thing. Obviously, there's always been pizza delivery, but food delivery and other delivery, commercial type uses are becoming more and more prevalent in the so-called gig economy or side work and stuff. Work with an independent agent. That is across the board recommendation for consumers in New Hampshire. Work with an independent agent to make sure you're getting the coverage that you're comfortable with at the price that you're comfortable with. And if you're doing something new in the gig economy, make sure that you're working with your agent to make sure, as Emily mentioned, that you have the coverage that you need before you have a crash. You really don't want to find out you were driving for Uber or doing some delivery work or something with your car that your insurer would consider a commercial endeavor that wouldn't cover you under your personal policy. So we encourage everyone to work with their agents to make sure, again, that they're getting the coverage that they need at the price they're comfortable with. We do have one question in the chat, and if you have more, by all means, please type them in here. Sarah asks, is a requirement for non-residents getting New Hampshire coverage still that the vehicle is garaged in state 365 days per year? And there's an example here. The client lives in Texas, wants to keep and insure their car in New Hampshire, but they like to go to the Cape for a weekend or two in the summer. So they would garage the car there, assuming the scenario for a couple days here and there. James, what do you think about that?
James thinks that's fine. I mean, we're not like exclusively garage does not mean like if you leave to go to a Red Sox game and stay the night in Boston, that you're not exclusively garaged there. We don't read it that strictly. Now, if someone lives in Rhode Island and they drive the car back there 50% of the time, then that would not be exclusively garaged here. But some really rare situation, that we're not. It's not that strict. But I would use my common sense on that one.
I've just sent everyone in the chat a link to our document directly. Obviously, everyone here on the meeting has that link because it was in the same email that you got the invitation to this webinar. But just for everyone's reference, I put it in the chat, so feel free to download that. Again, I think we encourage everyone to manage their risk appropriately, work with an independent agent, call them with any questions, but call us too if you have other questions that are unanswered or that you think we can help with. Our contact information is in the document, a couple different places. You want to reach, as James mentioned, Keith Nyan, our Consumer Services Department leader there, and his team will be able to assist you as best they can with any questions that you still have after speaking with your agent and reading our document. Not seeing any more questions in the chat. I guess we'll close it off. Commissioner, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
I just want to thank everybody in the team for putting this together and helping us refresh the frequently asked questions, and also for the attendees. And I know Andrew will make a copy of this recording available. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, guys.
Appreciate you all. Thanks very much.